Hello everybody, my name is Tratnos, and welcome to This Week in Mythic Plus. This week's affixes are Tyrannical, Sanguine, Explosive, and of course, Thundering. Now, before we talk about Mythic Plus this week, just a quick reminder, this week's weekly event is the World Quest event as well, so when you first log in for the week, maybe just pop into your adventure journal, scroll around, pick up the weekly quest if you're planning to do any World Quests this week, get a little bit of extra rep out of it. That being said, this week's affixes. It is actually sort of nasty in a lot of dungeons from what I've seen so far. The big problem, the big challenge with the week is actually Explosive Tyran is quite bad on a lot of these boss encounters. For instance, first boss Ruby Life Pools, Melodrosa, I don't remember how this is actually pronounced by the NPCs here, but the whelps are things from which explosives can spawn, which is very annoying. Similarly, you've got bosses like Algathar Academy tree boss, right? Bunch of ads, bunch of explosive locuses from which they can spawn. Yeah, lots of... There are a few bosses in a few dungeons like that where you are going to have to look out for stray explosives. My stupid dragon just keeps roaring. Hop off that thing. So that's something that's going to be tough. The other thing, of course, that's going to be tough is just Sanguine in general. Sanguine is one of those affixes where before the Sanguine week starts, you're kind of like, it's not too bad. And then you start playing and you're like, this is really annoying. And then the week ends and you're like, oh, thank goodness it's not Sanguine anymore. There are, of course, good ways to deal with it. Good tank players can manage it well. There are some tools in some talent trees that you should look at as well. For instance, Prot Warrior, Disrupting Shout. Make sure that the casters are coming with you out of the Sanguine puddles and not free casting in there. Any effects like Ring of Peace, Typhoon, not Ursul's Vortex. Don't use that one. Still talent it, but don't use it to try and knock mobs, obviously. The Evoker, Racial knock, all of those things. If people in your group are using those proactively to manage Sanguine, that can be really good. But ultimately, a lot of it does come down to your tank and the fact that they need to make sure that they're moving as mobs die, and they kind of need to know what the mobs are about to do so that they aren't gonna stand and root themselves in Sanguine and cast stuff for a while. This is also sometimes a thing about DPS prioritization, making sure that you're killing the mob that is in danger of Sanguine healing and wiping the group, rather than focusing on the other mobs. Another thing to think about this week is just your pull sizing. Anytime you're doing like a big pull, there are some pretty big pulls that you can get away with in keys generally, but Explosive is going to potentially overwhelm you this week, so you do need to be careful with that. And in some dungeons as well, you need to be careful with the Sanguine in tight hallways situation that I'm sure you're familiar with from past expansions. I think Azure Vault has some fairly tight hallways. Halls of Valor also, sometimes you'll put Sanguine in places that you're intending to use, so that can be a bit of a pain. But other than that, I don't think there's any huge like Sanguine catastrophes like there were in some previous expansions. I don't think there's really anything. I haven't done all the dungeons yet this week, and I didn't play too much of the Sanguine Volcanic Fortified. Actually, I did do keys that week, so I don't really remember there being any huge Sanguine. This pull is one that will be a big problem on Sanguine unless you do something really big against it. I don't think this expansion quite has as much of that. You do have to watch out for High Channeler. High Channeler stands and casts for like 10 seconds sometimes, so make sure you're not dropping the Storm Warrior Sanguines under her. But other than that, I think it's fairly chill affix in most of these dungeons, at least in theory. Obviously, in practice, it's going to depend on your tank and the rest of your group. Anyways, that's a quick look at the affixes for this week. If you're interested in some routes, I've started updating the routes over on Radar.io again as well. They're not for everybody, but they try to kind of hit a middle ground of like, let's skip some enemies, right? Let's skip the worst enemies without like using invis pots, using shrouds, stuff that not every group's going to have access to, or strategies that are going to be unfamiliar to most players. So for instance, we're happy to skip Flame Gullet. We're happy to do the like fly into the last area of Nokkad without pulling anything, because these strategies they make the route simpler in terms of like what you have to actually execute and the difficulty of some of the hardest pulls. And a lot of people already know these things, but we're not doing anything super complicated in any of these routes, so it should be pretty easy to just download one of these routes and quickly check through it and then do it without having to like watch a video about how anything in there is done. The closest thing is maybe this fly into Not Good thing, but I feel like most people have now learned how to do this. If you haven't done this in Not Good, the way it works is you just come from the south, fly over this little bridge. There's a little bridge over this river that you can use to kind of orient yourself, and then just make sure you're to the left of these packs. There's a little channeler mob that is neutral or actually unfriendly or whatever casting in here. You just aim for that thing, and you will land inside the hold, and you don't have to kill or skip any of these really annoying packs on the way in. If you can get your whole group to do that, makes this dungeon quite a bit easier. If you don't want to do that, you want to just pull these mobs, you can just take this route, cut, like pull 19, 21, something like that, and add in some of the trash here that you want to pull instead. That's totally fine too. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this video. Links to the routes are in the description as well. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.